I think it really comes down to having a great leadership staff, right? It might sound a little cliche to a lot of people of like, well, sure, Justin, if you have a COO and you have a CFO and you have a CMO and you have a great team, you wouldn't have to be involved. But I mean, that's really the simple answer is, having those key positions in place to where every department is running itself kind of, independently of my decisions.
Hey, it's the Profit Answer Man, Rocky Lalvani. If you're new to the podcast, check out my interview with Mike Michalowicz. It's episode number 2. If you want to hear about each chapter in the Profit First book, go back and listen to episodes 3 through 13. Episode 1 is the why and how. On the Profit Answer Man, we learn money mastery without all the complicated accounting mumbo-jumbo using a simple system. Your accountant is busy documenting your transactions and creating a rearview mirror of what happened. My guess is you don't even look at the reports they sent you. If you're like most business owners, you struggle with this, and it's not your fault. We aren't taught money in school, and accountants aren't taught how to be profitable. The Profit First system created by Mike Michalowicz works, and he certified me to help you implement the system in your business. Remember, the new equation is sales minus profit equals expenses. Let's face it, without cash flow, you can't pay your employees, buy needed materials, or pay your mortgage and support your family. I help you to do that and more, so you can focus on the parts of the business you love and receive the rewards for your labor and investment into your business. The stronger you are as a business owner, the more jobs you create, the better we are as a country. Small business owners are the backbone of America, and for that, you deserve to be well rewarded. Just remember, more revenue does not equal more profit. That's why we focus on the bottom line. Getting great help is a massive problem for all small business owners. Finding those A players at a cost we can afford, or just finding people to do some of the stuff we don't really want to do. That's what we're going to talk about today. Justin Nelson is from Sphere Rocket VA. He shows how virtual assistants can help us and be extremely cost effective and can do some very specialized work. Here's the thing. Because it is so cost effective, you can hire multiple people. He also talks about the best ways to use them and how to make sure that they are effective in your business. He also shows you how he will connect you with the best talent without you having to spend hours, weeks, and days searching. They bring you the talent so you don't have to go looking for it, which is always nice. And of course, it's got to be profitable. And then this one is. So let's meet Justin. Welcome to the Profit Answer Man, Justin Nelson. It's great to meet you.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Can you share a little bit about yourself and your business?
Yeah, so I'll keep it really straightforward. I live out in Nashville, Tennessee, 27 years old. Spend about 90% of my time in what we call Sphere Rocket VA, which is my virtual staffing business located in the Philippines. And really got here from starting in real estate around the age of 15. Was a big inside sales agent for a big real estate team and had a few different gigs in between there, but ended up about 3 years ago launching Sphere Rocket VA, which now employs over 5,000 people and where I spend a majority of my time. And, it's where it creates a majority of my wealth and my people's wealth.
You're relatively young, but yet you've built a 7-figure company inside of 16 months, no outside funding.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm assuming that you've built it in a way that you don't have to work hard.
I mean, I would say yes. If I didn't want to work today, especially with like our residual revenue elements to it and subscription models, I definitely don't think it would grow as fast, but it would definitely still grow. And it would definitely, definitely not suffer if I spent, 5 hours in it a month versus 40 hours a week. So absolutely.
5 hours a month. How do you run a seven-figure business on 5 hours a month?
Yeah, so I think it really comes down to having a great leadership staff, right? It might sound a little cliche to a lot of people of like, well, sure, Justin, if you have a COO and you have a CFO and you have a CMO and you have a great team, you wouldn't have to be involved. But I mean, that's really the simple answer is, having those key positions in place to where every department is running itself kind of, independently of my decisions.
How do you afford top talent with a seven-figure revenue for all those positions?
Yeah, so we're actually probably right at the breaking point right now of eight figures. So we'll end up right around 9 to 10 a year. So even when we were, in full transparency, even when we were around 3 million a year in revenue, one of the ways that I at least afforded it, it's kind of biased. Obviously, I have a virtual staffing company, so about 90% of our staff is in the Philippines. So we have a little bit of reduced cost there, and labor cost, and so for me to be able to go make a $200,000 a year COO hire, a $200,000 a year CMO hire, maybe pay myself 300,000-400,000 a year. We're really only sitting at, 700,000-800,000 out of our 3.5-4 million of where we used to be when I first made those hires. So, we're still only really sitting at 20% of our gross revenue. And you're like, a lot of companies can't do that because then maybe the rest of their 70% of employees are also stateside and, they're $50,000-$100,000 employees, where in our business, we lean heavily in our growth periods on virtual staffing.
And we're going to talk about virtual staffing. Before we do, you're familiar with Profit First. How did you learn about that?
Yeah. So, like I said, when I got into real estate when I was about 15, so probably about 12 years ago, I kind of got to build the business alongside of my dad. And somewhere along in that journey, a few years back, probably when I was about 21, 22, Profit First kind of became a big thing. It became really big within the Keller Williams system, which is where I held my real estate license. I don't remember their connection there, but I know it was really took off within that a big ecosystem. And so that's where I first learned of it. I implemented it in my real estate business to start. And then kind of when I got more into the virtual staffing company, which took off 100 times faster than my real estate business, we just kind of took it over to there as well.
And how has it helped in your business?
So I think for me, at least when I was a real estate agent, the first way it helped me, and I know it talks a lot about this, is I would always pay myself whatever I had left, right? And sometimes it was good and sometimes it was bad. And so I was living a pretty inconsistent. Some months I would make 30 grand and months I would make negative 5 grand because I was really living on the principle of I'm going to make this, I'm going to spend all this, and maybe I'll have something left over. And so I think the very first way that it helped me is just by making my income a priority, on the model was really, really big for me. And so there wasn't as much variable to my income, which, kind of took away some of the stress and some different things like that. And it allowed me to know how fast to scale the expenses rather than just guess.
And I think that's what most business owners do, right? They guess.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I know in the world of real estate, it's kind of funny because you're dealing with large numbers. In other words, whatever you're selling, small numbers become insignificant. But the reality is the person in real estate is making small numbers and they have this jaded view of how much money is actually coming and going in their business. And they don't realize that you're really running your business on a small amount of money, not the big numbers you see coming and going.
No, not at all. You're exactly right.
So you went over and you built this virtual company. I'll be honest, in the past, I've struggled a lot with virtual assistants. I think a lot of times it probably has to do with communication, training, finding the right person, dealing with all of these different factors that come up. What advice do you have for people like me who this is all kind of new to and are trying to do it right the first time?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm obviously biased to the way our model is, but I'm going to kind of talk in generalities here. A lot of times people do the two extremes. Number one, what they'll do is they'll start to explore this idea of virtual assistants. And they'll go, hey, I see all these people with success using VAs, for example, from the Philippines and other parts of the world. And they'll start trying to research, like, okay, how do I make this happen? And then usually always two things happen when they do this. They've come and find the big companies, the big Fortune 500 type companies. And as we talked about before we got on here, you go, all right, I want a VA from XYZ company. And they're like $2,000 a month. And the company will convince you that for $2,000 a month, you're saving costs versus $4,000 a month and here in the US, which is true. So they can sell you the fact that you're going to save 50% on your labor costs. But what they don't tell you is when you spend that $2,000 a month with them, they're going to turn around and only pay the VA 500 of the 2,000. And so in your mind, you see $2,000 coming out of the bank, but you're only getting a $500 a month worth of an employee, which, $500 a month in the Philippines does go a long way. It is a great income, but it's not going to get you that higher level, manager level, someone that can write your SOPs or, execute where they're bringing you ideas in type of situation. Someone at that level probably doesn't have a college degree. And so really that's one way that people get started. So they'll make a mistake of going there and just spend a lot of money for a lower level employee, or they'll go the opposite way to try and save capital and they'll try and find their own, right? They'll use like Craigslist in that country. And the problem is then while all the dollars you're spending going to them, a lot of people try and become too cheap. It's something else you and I talked about too. It's like a lot of times people with VAs are like, oh, so I can pay someone ethically $250 an hour. It's like, yeah, you could, right? That's still a good living. I've been there. It is. However, just because you can pay someone $30,000 a year in the United States doesn't mean that that's what your business needs, which I think is a huge thing. Is we really want to try and get virtual staff that already has expertise in the area that we need them to cut down on the training and communication needs and some of those things.
And how do you train somebody who is half the world away? The time zones are opposites, and which makes it difficult. And yeah, how do you do all of that?
Yeah, so I'll kind of ask you a question. Let's say, Rocky, you were 18 years old, and I said, "Hey, would you for $200,000 a year work night shift if all you had to do was work 30 hours a week?" And I don't know your answer, but 99% of people would go, absolutely. And so when we look around the ecosystem, number one, I believe that all virtual staff should work on our same time zone. So they are working night shift in the Philippines, but they're also paid in compensation for night shift, right? Like my wife, she's a respiratory therapist. She works night shift in the United States. I don't think that that's unethical. I don't think that she's, like by any means suffering from that. But I do know that she's compensated, in reward for working night shift. And it's something she loves to do. And so same thing in the Philippines. Number one is I don't want a virtual staff unless they're working on my own time zone. So that's a big thing for me. And number two, to be honest with you, with the world of Zoom, especially during COVID and how it was accepted, you can't see this in my office right now. But if you were to look in front of me, I actually have all these different computer screens. So I have a computer screen with my marketing department. I have a computer screen with my AR and billing department. I have a computer screen with my social media department. And they're all Zoom rooms with all of my team on there. And so a lot of times people operate virtual assistants on what I call old school technology communication. We send them a project through email, they respond back, and we play this massive tag game where for me, after this, for example, Rocky, I'm going to jump in my marketing call and be like, hey guys, just got done on the podcast with Rocky. Be on the lookout so that way when it comes out, we can share it and do everything we need to do with it. And now it's not email, right? I got to see them face to face. I get to hear their questions, their communication. So I would say that those are probably the two biggest things as far as helping kind of bridge that gap.
So do you have multiple Zoom rooms open at the same time?
I do. So each department head starts a Zoom room every morning at 8 a.m. Central, and then their entire team comes into that Zoom room. And each person in our organization is mandated to sit in that Zoom room 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. during their shift. Now, they may sometimes go off camera. They may sometimes mute themselves because they're taking calls or either they're in meetings. But for the majority of the time, I should be able to see and jump into each Zoom room and see who's available, be able to chat with them one-on-one. So yeah, each department has their own Zoom room.
So you've almost created a virtual office very similar to where you could walk down the hall and talk to somebody.
Yeah. So I also, right now, I hold my real estate license at eXp Realty. And eXp Realty has something called Verbella that Glenn Sanford, the owner, is a big proponent of. And it's actually that, like with my VA staff, we also use Verbella in some different fashions. I can actually log into an avatar world and I can walk around in our virtual office with my team and see them and communicate with them and do things like that. So we do kind of live in a Zoom crossed over with a little bit of, I wouldn't say augmented reality because I don't have a headset on. I'm not seeing them, but I can go into my different departments. And, the reality is a lot of times people fail with VAs because they can't find them, right? They're working for 5 employers. They're only saying they're working for you, but you don't know, you're not in the office with them. You can't, you sometimes can't trust that. But in our model, when they're on the screen with me all day, I know if they're working or not because we also have their screens being tracked at the same time.
How do you get multiple Zoom rooms on the same computer? I didn't even know that was possible.
Yeah, so you can actually be in multiple Zoom rooms if you're the administrator of a Zoom and you have a whole bunch of department heads. Inside of Zoom, you can basically create departments within your settings, and you can basically create each department a Zoom room. We also sometimes, depending on the time of year and how much we use them, we also sometimes just use one Zoom and then we use breakout rooms too. So there's a few different options on how to do it. But yeah, if you're the admin, you can be in multiple Zoom rooms at one time.
What other technology are you using to communicate, to get work back and forth, and to be able to do this?
Yeah, so we primarily use Slack, which is a big, industry monster. It's primarily what we use in my entire organization's in Slack. Obviously, our entire organization is also in Google Drive, so everything's cloud-based, So those are probably our 2 biggest uses as far as communication goes. Is Slack also integrates with Zoom, which works really, really well for us. So, a great example of this is if I'm in a marketing department meeting in that Zoom room and I hit record, I can actually, after I'm said and done, I can hit pause and then I can actually type notes out and have it sent to a certain Slack channel. And so now if someone wasn't live at that meeting, they can go back and watch it. And so, yeah, I'd say Slack, Zoom, and Google Drive are probably 99% of our communications.
So I know even in the US, hiring face-to-face isn't always easy, right? Not, hiring people is always difficult. What tips do you have for hiring people remotely, and how do you vet properly to make sure you made the right decisions?
Yeah, so I'll kind of tell you. I mean, obviously, I'm going to give you 2 avenues. Number one, our organization, that's why most people usually come to us, is because we do all of that for them. So I'll tell you exactly how we do it. I'll give you the secrets. And then I'll tell you if you're like, hey, I don't want to pay Justin's company or a company like his to do it for me. I'll just do it myself. So, if you number one, if you're to do it yourself, you need to have as many applications as possible. Right. Like a lot of times people fail in the VA world because they'll go on to like an online jobs PH, which is a great website, and they'll put out a job ad and then they'll get 10 resumes. Now, let's say, Rocky, let's say you did that. You're a busy man. You're doing podcasts. You're doing this. You're doing that. Like you're running around. So you get these 10 resumes and you're like, I guess those will do. Right now it's time to go interview these people. And you might get 1-2 interviews deep. You might process and eliminate some people and then you pick somebody. And so that's obviously usually mistake number one is we don't have enough resumes. So, for example, when someone comes to us, Sphere Rocket in the Philippines, we average about 92,000 applications a month to work for us. Now, some people are like, 92,000, that can't be true. Like, but getting a virtual assistant job in the Philippines is like becoming a doctor, becoming a lawyer. Like it's that coveted because the pay is so high in comparison to other jobs. And so, if someone comes to me and I have 92,000 applications and our company only hires about 200 VAs a month out, give or take. And so I get to choose the 200 out of 92,000. And so just that alone gets rid of a lot of problems, right? You get rid of a lot of the interview problems. You get rid of a lot of the person doesn't have the skill set. If you only get 10 resumes, Rocky, you might call all of their references and you might not get a hold of any of them, right? Because there's not a lot. So you're kind of like a lot of the formalized process can't be done when you don't have enough applicants to choose through. You can't be as picky. And so I would say that's one of the big ones. And then also not being able, to go 4, 5, 6, 7 interviews deep. Like if it's just you interviewing those 10 candidates, you probably aren't going 5 interviews deep on 5 different people. Maybe you are, but maybe you're not. And even if you are, if you go 5 interviews deep with someone and they fail you, you're probably a little bit wounded from that process. You're like, man, that hurt. It took a long time. Where with us, I'll be fully transparent. I have 60 full-time recruiters on my staff. That's 60 of my 100 people are recruiters. And so like whenever I need a position, I tell my team like, hey, I need a new video editor. They're the ones taking the hits and the wounds, and they're the ones digging through thousands of resumes, and they bring me the person. And if they work out, awesome, super great. If they don't, all I do is pick up the phone and go, hey, recruitment, get me another one. I go on my way for 5 to 7 days, and they're going to bring me someone else. And so I would say, that for me would be kind of the simple answer.
No, and I think that's a lot of it. The first time you do anything, it's a little scary, but when you work with people who do it day in, day night, it's routine and processes. This is what we do. We've learned from doing this so that now our systems, our processes, everything's down perfectly. And so it's much easier.
I think too, the other thing that's interesting is a lot of times people have an expectation that the hire you make is going to be perfect. Like if you do it or we do it, sometimes people think no matter what, it's going to be perfect, that hire. And I think that's a little bit false. I mean, I live in a world where I get to work with a lot of high level CEOs and people that are Fortune 500 companies. And I see Fortune 500 companies go spend $50 million for a job search to find the right candidate, and they still get it wrong, right? We see NFL coaches, football teams, baseball teams, big organizations try and go find the right person. And then a year later, they're getting walked right out the door because it didn't work. So I think for me, it's more about understanding that it's a process. And it's like, don't put all your eggs in just that one basket, that's going to be the person that takes you to the next level.
Interesting. So just to give people an idea, like what are the types of jobs that we can hire for virtually?
It's going to sound cliche, but it's if the job doesn't require an in-person presence, it can be anything. And so I'll give you an example of this. I have 6-figure employees in the Philippines that make 6 figures US dollars that I pay. Now, when you think about 6 figures in the Philippines, 100,000 US dollars, that's a high level person, right? Those are people with MBAs. Those are people that are high level. And so I say anything. I mean, it could literally be, I have VAs, Rocky, to be honest with you, that are podcast hosts for me. They interview US based employers every single day. I have VAs that are in AR and billing, social media. I have VAs that help with support, social media marketing, graphic design, website design. And so when we look back over our last 5,000 hires, I have people, Rocky, that come to me and say, Justin, can you find me an electrical engineer? And I'm like, yeah, we can. Because guess what? The Philippines has electrical engineers. They have mechanical engineers. And so we really don't have a limit. About the only thing we don't hire out of the Philippines is developers, like web developers.
Any reason?
Mostly just because there's such a talent gap between there and India. If you're trying to outsource, the reason why most outsourcing doesn't go to India in the non-tech world is because of a thick accent. It's a little bit of a language barrier for people, but their like technology smarts is 100 times what the Philippines is. And I say that with full respect for the Philippines because that's where 99% of our staff comes. So we just find way better talent technological wise. So
now, I think because of the success of the Philippines and being virtual, I'm hearing Eastern Europe, South Africa, and South America. They all seem to be growing areas for this type of service.
Absolutely. Especially for those that are in those time zones, right? So like a great example of this is whenever I get on like an Australian podcast, like what I have to say is not super groundbreaking to them because they're in such a time zone equivalent to the Philippines. They've been doing this for longer than the US has, right? Like the Australia introduced the US to Philippines outsourcing. And so, a lot of companies in like Europe that are kind of in a weird, like the time zone conversion doesn't flip as well. It doesn't flip an exact 12 hours. Like here in the US, I'm an exact 12-hour flip. So it's perfect night shift, day shift. Some other parts of the world, that time zone equivalency doesn't work as well. And so you're definitely starting to see, and when you look at Eastern Europe, South Africa, and some of those different places, they all kind of line up in similar time zones to a good portion of the world's, economy that isn't Philippines and that isn't United States. And so those are definitely, I'm actually starting to get more requests for those, and it's not something we heavily service at this point, but it's definitely a direction we're moving.
Do you have any great, I'm not going to say success stories, but kind of like ahas where people have started to do this and they had that kind of shift in the way they looked at things?
Yeah, so I mean, I'd say the biggest aha was, especially in real estate, we have a lot of people that want to try and go make $500,000 a year on their own. They want to try and net it. They don't want any help because they want to go on stage and they want to have their award and say, I did it myself. Right. Or you have the opposite where they're just scared to death, Rocky. They came from a corporate world where they felt like they were treated poorly. They weren't loved on. So they have some PTSD of actually hiring people and having to like make them feel loved and treated right. And so we with a virtual assistant, let's say you're even making 500 grand a year net in real estate as an agent. That's a lot of money. Like that's only 1% of agents are doing that. And so if you're like, well, I need to hire an administrative assistant that's a rock star in my office, that's probably 70 to 80 grand, depending on where you're at. Sure, you could get a little cheaper some places, but it's probably 70 to 80 grand for a higher level person. That's almost 20% of your revenue. And then you talk about peaks and valleys. And then like we talked about, most agents don't know where their money goes. A lot of times that 70 to 80 grand that assistant would cost would be their slush fund that they pay themselves at the end of the year. That'd be kind of their profit. And so I think the biggest story to kind of wrap this back around is when someone can go, wait, for 10 grand a year, I could have a full-time social media assistant working 40 hours a week. And it's not really touching my bottom line to a degree, right? Like they don't feel it. It doesn't put their business in jeopardy. It doesn't, they don't feel like it's something that they can't, obtain or that they couldn't pay. It kind of gives them this place of being able to have employees in a place of non-stress. Because usually when you need to hire people is when you're in a high stress moment, you're overwhelmed, or you're like, our company's turning and we need more business.
One of the biggest struggles that I hear people talk about is a lot of their processes are paper based. In other words, they need people to open the mail. They need people to, a lot of the things come in a way that, and honestly, I'm thinking they just don't know how to share, or they're also worried about security within their system. So those are probably two separate things. Why don't we do, when you live in a world that, like, let you go back to real estate, if you're talking more of a real estate investor, a lot of times there's so much paper receipts, paperwork, and now scanning all that stuff becomes a massive undertaking. What suggestions do you have for a business like that? And then let's touch on security.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's all about just, and this is going to sound kind of maybe harsh to some people, but it's coming into the 21st century. Like I'm a real estate investor. I run a business heavily off of paper and things like that, but it's all digital now. I mean, signing contracts with your buyers and your investors is all digital. The only thing that I see that is actual paper anymore in real estate investing or any real estate business is if you have a client that does not use a computer. Like, you get someone that's 80, 90 years old, they don't use a computer. Yes, there might be a digital run, but we use things like task list and task grab and things like that to have those things done. But like, even for me, my day-to-day business, like my receipts are about the only thing that might be physical. And even then, most of those go digital right away nowadays. And so, I always tell people this. Most companies are never going to go fully virtual, right? They're still I still have US based staff, right? I have a US based gal who does my events here in Nashville. She's local, right? Because I need her to go pick up my banners and I need her to take my flyers. And so I still have someone there, but guess what? I can pay her 50 grand a year and I can give her 3 virtual assistants. That's a 4-person pod in our company for 80 grand versus most companies might get 1.5 people, where I have 4 people. And so there's also a hybrid, right? So like, to be fully clear, I still have US based staff that has to do some of those paper grab tasks, but you find that most companies don't even get to 1 employee. They don't even get to 2 employees because they don't have enough man hours to get to that next step. So.
And what do you do about security?
Great question on security. So most people, and this is kind of an exercise I do on stage a lot with people, they think that there's a higher level of security risk when you have someone foreign versus than if you have someone in person. It's not true at all. The only reason is our mental mind goes, well, where do most scams originate from that people fall for in their emails and things like that? Well, of course it's foreign based, right? Because a lot of these countries are third world countries. They're going to have more scams coming out of. However, when you set up your business properly, and this is, a big reason why people will come and pay us for what we do, is we're going to audit that in your business, and we're going to go like, hey, like in real estate, for example, the only thing a real estate transaction VA does not do is they don't handle wiring instructions. Like they're not allowed to handle that because that could turn into a scam, that can turn into some things. So when we do an audit with our people to go, yeah, that thing probably should not be done with anybody, right? It shouldn't be done with your US based staff, or it should be done with someone US based staff that has a higher level, a big contract on them, tight restrictions, things like that. So there are some, risks, but it's no different than if I were to hire my $50,000 a year assistant who is just coming out of college. He or she's going to have the same level of risk as someone in the Philippines. And to be honest with you, when you set up your systems right, like my team in the Philippines, their screens are monitored all day long. We have security things on their computers. We have network protections. And so I would actually say my team, because that's the expectation of how it's going to run up front, you're going to be on camera. Your screen's going to be recorded all day. You're going to have these things installed on your computer. We're actually probably more safe than the person and business owner that just hires someone and goes, there's a laptop over there. We'll get started.
And I guess you have somebody in the Philippines who sets that up and does it all for you.
Correct, for our team. Yeah. And there's a lot of things like my COO here in the Philippines, we assume the worst. And this is for my US based staff too. I assume that every single day someone's going to log into my network and delete everything. And so once a week, right, we're on Google Drive backing things up. We click a button, it goes to my COO's desktop. He's got triple, redundancies and things like that. And so, it's really just about thinking about it, right? Just knowing and thinking about it and going, hey, how do I do this safely? Or how do I give my password to my Facebook account to my VA and it be protected? Like there's softwares for that, right? There's things to do that. And so I think, without sounding biased here, that's what our value is to the world for a lot of people, because you could go find your own VA. But if you're like, hey, how do I go find my own VA and be secure and think of things I've never thought about? That's ultimately what I'm doing on a daily basis, is going, yeah, here's how you would do it securely. Or to give you the answer you don't want to hear, is there are a few things where you maybe shouldn't offshore that.
Nope, I totally understand. Is there anything that we should have talked about on this topic that we didn't get a chance to?
I would say the only thing I would tell people, especially when it comes to a profit first model, is if you're really concerned about your profit and you need staff, but maybe you haven't been a leader before, you haven't had to hire staff, get staff on, you haven't gone through the process of having what you talked about to train them, feel that pain, you haven't had to learn systems or how to communicate with other people, virtual staff is a great way to start building that muscle, because at $3, $4, $5 an hour, it's a great way to make mistakes instead of doing that on your first $100,000 hire, right? Doing it on your first $5,000 a month hire. And so sounds kind of weird for me to go, virtual assistants are a great place for you to get rid of your leadership mistakes, but it's true, right? I'd rather, make my mistakes at the gambling, at the blackjack table, at the dollar table, than I would go to the $100 table type of situation. So for those that are kind of feeling like, man, I'm just scared. I'm just scared to take that next step in my business. VA staff is why I got started. I was 16 years old going, who's going to work for me, right? I mean, like I'm a 16-year-old, I still do dumb things, but VAs were a great way for me to, let's be honest, my first 8 VAs aren't with me anymore because I was a bad leader. Like I just didn't know what I didn't know. I was learning. But, it was a great way. It didn't put me underwater. It's primarily why I didn't need outside funding, because I had lower staffing costs.
And that's a big part of it. I mean, overhead crushes everybody. Mm-hmm. So keeping it down, finding the right people. And today, I mean, the reality is I think everyone's facing a labor shortage. Mm-hmm. And so that is kind of the biggest issue. Some jobs you cannot do virtually. Some you require people in person. That's great. But if you can do stuff virtually, or second, if you can get rid of mundane things from your great people, for not that much money, then they're more likely to stay. So it's kind of
Absolutely.
making a
It's like,
better work atmosphere.
yeah, if you got someone at 60 grand a year and you're like, all right, they're overloaded and stressed, instead of hiring someone else at 60 grand a year, just go build them a mini team and let them be the leader and let them get the tasks they hate off their plate. Now you're 60 grand a year plus 10 grand plus 10 grand plus 10 grand. You're back to an Elon Musk type thing. He just has more people. Your organization has more people, more manpower for a cheaper cost.
Do you see that productivity is the same in the Philippines or different than the US?
So I would say it's same, if not harder. Again, you might think I'm biased, but it's just they just work harder than people in the US. Now, I will say that I might sometimes hire two people for the position of one, which is still cheaper. It's still cheaper by far. But I now allow them to be specialists, right, in that thing. So you could say, yeah, one person in the US could do the job that I have two people doing, but I also build security in my business. Like my podcast editor department, I have 5 people. Now, could it possibly be 2 people in the US? Sure. But my 5 people is way cheaper than even one in the US. And now if someone gets sick, they want to quit. They don't, something goes wrong in their life. I have 4 people left. It's the whole department doesn't shut down. Where if I had one editor in the US and he wanted to hold me hostage, I'd be kind of out of luck. So,
and that is very true. If people would like to learn more about you, connect, what's the best way for them to find out more about you guys?
Yeah, best way is if you just type in Sphere Rocket into the internet, you'll find us. It's a term. It's not used in very many things, but if you're listening on the podcast and you want a discount or want to talk to us directly, you can just go to hireleverage.com, which is HIRE leverage.com.
Okay. We'll put those in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Lots of my clients use virtual assistants. I do too. They're super helpful. They can be very efficient and very, very helpful at small amounts of time at a very reasonable amount. The thing is, you got to get the right people. You got to create the right systems to manage and take care of everything. You got to create the right training systems to be able to have them do what you need to do. And don't just think they can do the routine. As we talked about, they can do some very high level work. You just got to find the right people, which isn't always easy. You got to make sure you pick the right ones, and you got to have a system for all of that, as always. So here you go. This is a perfect example of how to get more resources without spending a fortune, which allows you to grow your bottom line. And that's what's most important. Thank you for all your help and have a wonderful day.
If you'd like for us to be a part of your profitability journey, we have different programs available ranging from do-it-yourself to one-on-one coaching. Our course, The Profit Blueprint, teaches you everything you need to know to transform your profitability. There are 3 different tiers ranging from DIY to done with you so that businesses of all sizes can get the support that's best. Join the waitlist in the show notes to get more information and be a part of the next cohort. If you want a done for you service, you can hire us as your chief profitability officers. We only work with a handful of clients, so they all get our full attention. We work with business owners who have or are growing to $500,000 to $10 million in revenue. You can use the scheduling link in the show notes to get on our calendar for a good fit conversation to see if we're the right people to support you and how we can help you.
This episode of the Profit Answer Man podcast is brought to you by SMBpodcastnetwork.com. The network is a collection of podcasts and shows from around the internet which focus on bringing you interviews with amazing guests who share actionable advice, ideas, and information for small and medium-sized business owners and entrepreneurs. Visit www.smbpodcastnetwork.com to find more great shows and easily subscribe to be notified of new episodes. It's a great way to discover quality content. If you've discovered us via the network, then I hope you enjoy today's show and will consider subscribing directly so you never miss our episodes. Remember to check out my other podcast, Richer Soul. where we talk about how to live the ultimate life and be the best business owner you can be. As we close out, let's repeat the mantra. Revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash is king. Have an abundant and profitable week.